last spoke with Ward 12 Calgary City Councillor Mike Jamieson, it was just prior to his narrow election victory back in October of 2025. We highlighted how the outcome of that municipal vote and others, like the election of now colleague Ward 14 Councillor Landon Johnston, would prove invaluable litmus tests in terms of determining whether the city was going to buck the trend of progressive politics, spearheaded by former Calgary Mayor Jyoti Gondek, and return to more conservative roots, or continue drearily down the drain of crumbling infrastructure, endless empty bike lanes, skyrocketing taxes, and climate emergencies. Fortunately, South Calgary did elect truly conservative candidates like Councillor Jamieson, and the city's new mayor Jeremy Farkas is at the very least quite a bit more reasonable than his predecessor. But despite this good news, there is undoubtedly a great deal of work to be done, largely because of the inept legacy of prior councils. With that said, I am happy to be joined by Mike Jamieson to discuss his efforts to get everything back on track and to begin rebuilding this great city. Well, Mike, thanks so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. Leading up into the October election, we spoke with you just prior to that. We sort of marked it as an important election because it signaled whether sort of Calgary was going to continue going down what many considered sort of a woke or progressive mentality, or whether it was going to be a sort of reversion back towards common sense running a city. Yourself, Landon Johnston, a number of other candidates certainly represented that common sense side of the conversation. But how significant was it to obtain that victory? I know it was tight. It was a matter, I think it was like 60, 80 votes, somewhere in that margin. But what did it mean to secure that victory when you're standing on those conservative principles?
Well, it was a very narrow margin win, but a win's a win, and I'll take the W. and I think what it indicates is that 4 years of the previous council in Gondak, and like you mentioned the woke agenda, there was a lot of very controversial things that were pushed through, and when you're pushing everything through at an 8-7 vote, that's not usually what the majority of Calgarians want, especially on every issue. Like if you're only winning by 8 votes every single time, it's typically an indication that maybe you're just going outside of maybe what the majority of people actually are looking for. And there was 10 new councillors, and
Yeah.
and then Jeremy Farkas as the new mayor. So we're talking 11 out of 15 brand new people in those positions. That what that does is that just signifies that Calgarians are just ready for I guess you could say a pivot and a change from the current direction, and I think they just want more of a practical use of common sense, but just I want my money spent on municipal items. I don't want to be every single issue to be a controversial issue like roads, infrastructure. They shouldn't be political issues, right?
Yeah.
Either a pipe works or it doesn't. And I think that is really what I heard a lot at the doors, and that's what people are looking for, I think, out of this next 4 years.
What's it like working with this council? I mean, particularly, and I'll ask any councillor who comes on, what's it like working with the new mayor, Jeremy Farkas?
You know what? I'm having a great time working with Jeremy. And we have a little joke kind of behind the scenes that so I didn't support him, he didn't support me, but you know what? We're working really well together, and I think that just shows that this new council is really. I think we want to see 10 votes. Get things through with a 10 vote. I mean, we've had a few big items that have come up so far, and some have got 11 votes, 12 votes. That's the kind of if you can, you want to aim for those numbers. But so far, I think Jeremy's doing a great job.
Like inclusivity is sort of like an artificial buzzword that people use. But one thing that I've noticed, rather than the sort of always one-sided progressive push, I don't think the progressive people have been cast out by any metric. It hasn't been a pendulum swing. You'll have sort of this acknowledgement of Trans Visibility Week or whatever, and then the next week acknowledgement of Christian martyrdom. They're attending the menorah lighting, but they're also they're acknowledging protests. Is there sort of more of a healthy balance where the politicians in City Hall aren't the ones leading the activism? They're allowed allowing it, but they aren't sort of taking the lead on one-sided activism.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I would say it's a lot more balanced than last time, which does create some healthy debate
Hmm.
and discourse, and I think that's always a sign of good governance. I don't think everybody should agree with everything all the time, and this particular council is pretty interesting. Even with the more conservative or progressive candidates, there's it's really hard to predict, and other media personnel have told me that last council, they knew exactly the 8 or 9 every single time on just about every issue, and this time it's a lot more difficult to predict, and you have, I think, you know, I think candidates are listening. So not candidates, so counselors.
Yeah.
Counselors are listening, and I think that's key because when you're making a decision, you're supposed to be open to persuasion.
Hmm.
And even though we all campaigned a certain way on certain topics and everything, the idea is you're supposed to just take a pause, leave that at the door per se, and have an open mind to be able to persuade. Public hearings, for example. The whole purpose is that we listen to what people are saying, and that you're amendable to persuasion. And I think this current council, how difficult it is to predict what direction things are going to go. I think that shows that that's exactly happening.
And does that suggest there's actually independent thought taking place rather than just block sort of monolithic group voting?
Yeah, yeah, I would say most people would agree that that's not happening right now. Not saying that it won't morph into that, and I'm sure over the next couple years, maybe some things will change. But I think that right now people are really listening to what they heard at the doors. The campaign is still, it's not too far away, even though it seems like it's been 2 years ago because of how fast everything's moving. But it's really not that long ago, and I feel that those. What we've heard on the campaign, I think most is still resonating with the counselors, and I think that's really important because that's the kind of thing that kind of gets you away from that block voting is what's important to my residents. But as a council, we're also we got to take the greater Calgary, in a whole approach also. First and foremost, yes, I represent Ward 12 and the Ward 12 priorities, but I also have to have the attitude that what's best for the greater Calgary too when you're making decisions, because ultimately, there's a famous saying that says, you know tide waters lift all ships. And I think that if we make Calgary a better place and do some, like, some positive policy changes, it's going to lift all wards and give people opportunity.
No, because prior councils, luckily, like you mentioned, the majority of which are gone, were so caught up with activism, they struggled in some of their duties for basic municipal politics that they're supposed to be engaging in. I think this council's very much been left to sort of rebuild Calgary in some ways. We can look at the unspent $3.61 billion that was supposed to go towards preventing these water calamities we've endured. But if you can talk about sort of how bad things were and if there's sort of hope on the horizon, if you want to go into any infrastructure project, if you want to get right into the water lines, but is there progress being made? How bad was it? Is there hope on the horizon?
Oh, there's definitely hope on the horizon. There's already a pivot in administration. I think people understand that that we're serious and we do mean business about getting stuff done that the previous council didn't. And that's not to put them down in any way, but they had more of an agenda. I would say more of a shiny agenda.
Mhm.
The sexy approach. It's the event center. The Workland, BMO, like all these really fantastic structures and infrastructure and investment. But I don't think that's currently I don't think that's the most popular thing right now with our council. I think roads, fixing potholes, our infrastructure, our water mains. We definitely talk about that, but I think it's core services. Defining what is a core service, and that's the direction that we want to instruct administration to spend our money. And I think that we have the will of the people right now to invest in the boring stuff, and that's exactly, as a taxpayer, where I want to see my money go.
The one thing, and I understand politicians generally beyond elections aren't held to account sort of retroactively, but the sort of massive costs endured by the city, the flooding, the damage. I mean, small businesses, we'll talk about this, have been affected, everything. Is there any sort of retroactive accountability for folks who completely failed in utter negligence of their duties? I feel like if people outside of politics were involved in this level of negligence, there would be some metric of accountability.
I, I think the short answer is I don't know. Maybe no.
Mm.
It's when you have for example, like we'll pick on water here, water capital and investment infrastructure. When you have like 22 years of not spending anywhere close to what council directs you to spend, you run into a giant deficit, and it's really hard. There's a few things. It's hard to hold somebody accountable when you're talking like over 2 decades,
Right.
because a lot of those people aren't around anymore. And also, there was a Bear Spot independent panel that looked into the reasons why, deep dive into the reason why the pipe burst and kind of what's been going on. And they identified some really important things to mention. That, and this is from their report, is that there was just years of deferred maintenance, years of deferred inspections, years of deferred investment, and I think that in their recommendation to, okay, how do we fix this, they had say five key recommendations. One of them being, you need a single line of accountability that doesn't exist right now. So you need to be able to track a dollar that you pay on your water bill to, where does it go to the very end? And you can't do that right now. You also, the accountability piece with direct, like who is the ultimate person in charge, who makes the ultimate decisions. There was a restructure that happened in 2021, and it kind of spread water out over several different departments, and I kind of think that that's part of the reason why it's really hard to track that accountability. So one of the main, I guess you could say, recommendations is a singular, silo approach to water utility, and so that there's a clear chain of command, and a clear tracking of where our money goes and how it's being spent, and make sure it is being spent.
Yeah.
You mentioned the 3.1. That was so my office. We did some inquiries because 60% of infrastructure money that's been approved by council was spent. Only 60% over the last over 20 years.
Mhm.
Well, okay, well, what's that 40% then? Because when you're talking about percentages, there's such an order of magnitude, you just don't even know what that means. So we asked questions. We said, well, what's the dollar value? Because numbers matter. And, it turned out to be, over $3.6 billion of council approved money that was not spent. And so we're asking more questions, like who is, over the years, who's been in charge of the decision maker of that? And there's a lot of various reasons why maybe or why that was done or why it wasn't done, but it's, to me, it's just unacceptable. And I've had some media interviews about this topic, and I've said, look, it's really important that you know the water part knows that we really want you to spend the money that we approve.
Mhm.
And there's obviously there's reasons why you didn't, but let's maybe change that now. If you could send 80-90% of what we approve, then that's exactly what I'm looking for.
Mhm.
Spend the money that's approved, and this, yeah, this Bears Paw feeder main is just opening kind of the Pandora's box of what's been going on. And in their words, they don't feel that it's just the water utility. They said, in any large organizations, typically if you see one systemic problem,
Mhm.
it's usually a problem. And I could get into more about that, but there's more investigations going on. So
Yeah.
but yeah.
Well, I mean, water leaks, so it exposes things. There's probably less evident leaks elsewhere. But this does seem, and it's in conversations with Landon and some of your other colleagues as well, there does seem to be this more of a forensic accounting metric of like, they're like, well, this money is here, this is there. And it's like, what's that for? How is it being used? Those are sort of questions that small businesses or individuals would ask. But the larger an organization gets, it seems they stray away from those questions. Um, Like you mentioned, though, it is the Pandora's box opening. I know that there's a March 9th, which this may be out just after that, but there's again water restrictions coming in.
Right.
Um, is that the start of the end of water restrictions and everyone being sick of this? Or is that, do we have to come to terms with the reality that there's going to be ongoing water projects for probably the next decade and there will be intermittent restrictions to get Calgary back to where it needs to be?
I can tell you that nobody in Ward 12 wants to hear the word water restrictions. Okay, but I do have to from my understanding, yeah, there's there's some spots that are in really bad condition, and the only way to relieve this, specifically the south feeder main, the issue, it's a 6 kilometer stretch that was made up of PCCP material. What It's not steel, and so there's an accelerated push right now to put a second line in so that there's a redundant line so we can fix that current one. There's at least 25 hotspots right now that are 10 out of 10 risk of failure, and that's all public knowledge.
Yeah.
And so what they're doing is they have plans this year. Um, Now this has been accelerated a little bit. They were planning on doing it in the spring and the summer, but because of the extra warm weather that we've been having in February, which has been, I think, everybody pretty fantastic,
Yeah.
is that the snow has melted and it's helped to fill back up the Glenmore Reservoir. So now that the reservoir is at a certain level, we sort of have the ability now to turn off or turn down the I guess it would be, yeah, completely shut off the south Bears Paw line so that we can do some of these repairs. And so their plan is they want to start tackling these repairs very strategically before another burst happens. So the reason why, so the March 9 month wasn't planned, but it was accelerated because we're like, okay, most people use the majority amount of water in the summertime. If we can get some repairs done in now, it's still in the winter months, and maybe in the spring before the high volumes, that's the whole purpose of this 9th date. And yes, it does mean restrictions, and I totally, myself included, like, I don't like restrictions. Nobody likes restrictions. But the reason why and this is what's really important, the reason why restrictions are in place is because 60% of all of our water comes from Bear Spa. So when you turn that off, the 40% that we usually rely on um, from the Heritage,
Glenmore Reservoir.
Glenmore
Yeah.
Reservoir, thank you. You've got to ramp that up 3 times capacity to feed the daily demand of water. And you got to understand, we're not just feeding Calgary; we're feeding municipalities around Calgary, right? We're putting Strathmore, or Airdrie. Like these are, there's a lot of need for water and a daily usage. So the water restrictions is really to save the amount of water in the Glenmore Reservoir as long as you can while we get these repairs done, and then the line will be re-energized, and then Glenmore will get a break to be able to refill, and that's what these restrictions are about. To really be very direct.
I think that helps for like arbitrarily the notion of turning off my hose. But when you hear it sort of explained like that, that'll probably help a lot of people. The other sort of angle of this, though, that there's been some conversation on in city council is the impact on businesses. I know Angels Cafe
Yeah.
is one that's received quite a bit of attention. We've had Kathy on before. Is anything being done to sort of help those businesses? Some of them sort of staples in the city that have been completely displaced, I mean, effectively overnight.
Yeah, I have been sort of an advocate for Angels. As a supporter of small business and small business owner myself. Kathy's, she's not going to be the only. Angels is not the only displaced business, but right now it seems like it's the worst. And there's no other business that I'm aware of that we're told like you have to move completely. And that yeah, it's very unfortunate, and I'm hopefully that her and the city can can work something out, because the deadline of March 9th is coming up pretty quick here. And so I believe that and I've been really requesting administration to take the compassion approach. I said, look, like, all all things aside, we have a small business owner that's been in the city paying taxes for almost 30 years, and Unfortunately, it looks like, especially now, uh, the building does have to be moved. And you know what? We need to take the compassionate approach. One size doesn't fit all. This is why I'm against blanket anything.
Mhm.
The blanket
We'll get
approach
there.
is okay. We'll get there, but I also think that we need to be human,
Mhm.
and we need to take care of people. In the way that if our accelerated work as a city is going to destroy not just one but several small businesses, then the city needs to be there, alongside to make sure that the collateral damage is minimized and we can help as much as we can. And that's the human approach in the city. And I've been very honest and very very loud, and it's been good. Like I've had a lot of good meetings with general manager level, even CEO, David Duckworth,
Mhm.
about we need to be treat people properly here, with the level of respect that our small business deserves. And we need to make sure that in the rush of getting something done really important, that we're not bankrupting small business along the way because of the decisions that we have to make. And I just really have been assured that compassion will be shown, and I'm really you know watching closely that will be shown.
I want to sort of machine gun through a few things we talked about in the last interview, and then see sort of from the here's what I'm going to do to here's what I am doing
Okay.
perspective. And the first one, maybe not necessarily something we got into as much, but the other one certainly. But I think Dan McLean has been talking about this war on cars,
Yeah,
the lack
yeah,
of parking spaces, this push. I mean, this is from the prior council to put bike lanes that nobody uses everywhere.
yeah.
Is this council sort of doing anything to address that, or is the war on cars still in full effect?
Well, yeah, for sure. There are some counselors that have, I believe, like the war on car mentality, where they're okay with certain development being done with, you know, not near enough parking, and that's a big deal because we are a car city,
Yeah.
and this idea that we're all just going to start, riding bikes, when we have winter, 6 to 8 months a year,
Mhm.
it's just not realistic. And it's, well, we'll try it. Let's just try it. Well, you know what? People are moving to the suburbs for a reason,
Yeah.
because they don't want to try it.
Yeah.
We don't want a 16 plex, with basement suites going up that has room for 8 parking stalls, and that's the problem that I see with that approach, is that you're, you know, forcing people into a position that's going to cause friction. And yes, the argument here, well, you know what you're getting into. Well, do you though?
Yeah.
What if you need another vehicle? What if your family increases? What if a child moves back home? What do you do? And so I'm strongly believe that we need to have a 1 unit to one parking ratio. It's the only thing that makes sense to me, and that's really, I think the way to, yes, grow the city, add densification, but do it in a responsible way that people are still able to park their vehicles. That is key.
Well, the rezoning, blanket rezoning. Let's talk
Yeah,
about
yeah,
that. I'm sure folks are aware with what it is, but sort of the city, despite massive feedback that people didn't want it, the former city council on a very activist event brought in this blanket rezoning, allowing for mass sort of densification without lots of these considerations for parking and traffic and all of that. The general consensus among the majority of Calgarians, and I believe the majority of current city council, is that it has to be done away with. How far along is that progress? When is that actually going to be? The one thing we can agree we should blanket is removing blanket rezoning.
yeah. That's a good way to put it. So right now we have had we voted. We had a vote to repeal. So that doesn't mean, let me clarify, it's not repealed yet. We voted in favor to repeal. So what happens is when you do the initial vote, it signals a public hearing. You must have another public hearing and then a second and third reading. The public hearing is booked for the end of March. The last start, I believe it starts the last week of March. And then the public will get the chance to speak for or against it, similar to what happened last time. Last time it was overwhelmingly against, over 70%. I've heard different numbers,
Hmm.
and council decided to vote it through anyways. Um, on the campaign trail, we heard it a lot too. People just really doesn't like they don't like this blanket approach. They don't like the way it's worded. It's become such a politically charged name
Yeah.
and what it, kind of what it stands for. That yeah, right now. I mean, all I hear is all the time is we need a complete repeal and we need to go back to the way it was, and then maybe tweak or fix some things, but go this way first. Now, I must be open to
Yeah.
persuasion during council, but Ward 12 is pretty loud, and arguably we might be affected the least amount by it, but I think it just highlights the broader thing which I mentioned before is that the previous council just didn't listen,
Yeah.
and people felt
Yeah.
not heard, and people invested a considerable amount of time in showing up and waiting, because sometimes you're waiting hours
Hmm.
to get your turn. Sometimes whatever circle you got to come the next day, and people put a considerable amount of time in these public hearings to feel that, well, council had already decided anyways. This was a big waste of my time, and a lot of people think it was, whether it was or wasn't directly maybe tied to the federal carrot, the money carrot that was given to Calgary. And so that's like a whole nother issue here is the money aspect. But that
That's next on the list. Don't
yeah,
worry.
yeah, well, great, yeah. So yeah, I think that right now, it just it just it appears the most sense could be just a complete repeal, and then figure out how to speed up some aspects
Mhm.
of the development that led to the blanket in the first place, and a lot of that is the planning and development department and how long it takes to get approvals through, and I think that was initially a lot of the frustration, why they're like, well, let's just do this. But clearly we know from a community-based approach is better,
Yeah.
and communities need a voice. And that's what I believe right now.
Well, and I think you're right. I think it's bad policy, but I think it became sort of the target for this city council's not listening to us, and this is the sort of straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. Um, if you want to get into the crime, we're running up against it for time. By all means, if you want to get into the city's approach on tackling crime and safety quickly, and then we'll get into the
Sure, sure, yeah.
finance. But let's touch on
Yeah.
sort of how the city's gone from defunding the police to let's actually make it so you can go downtown.
Yes. Thank goodness that rhetoric about defunding the police is not being pushed anymore. I think just it's an extreme, woke kind of approach. That's not saying that we don't need social workers and that we don't need mental health people, to help assist the police. But you know what? When you have somebody that clearly needs help, you need an officer.
Yeah.
You need a police officer to deal with it. I've done a ride along with the police, and you know what? They're a fantastic organization, and they have a very difficult job, and they never know what they're going to respond to on it, and it can range. I mean, their days can be crazy,
Yeah.
and a lot of what they deal with is people that are struggling, whether it be homelessness, substance abuse, that ties into a lot of their calls, which lead to domestics and this and that. And so I believe that the support services are there in place, and I think a lot of them are important, but I don't think that can take away from having actual police officers responding to emergencies and events, because you need that level of authority.
Absolutely. And you also need, when folks are dealing with those levels of difficulty, it's similar to armed forces, first responders. They deal with stuff we can't imagine. To have city council then sort of dumping on them and saying they need to be defunded, you need that support from your community. That's what helps police get through it, plus their
Yeah.
families. So,
I mean, a lot of that too is, I mean, even that's just rhetoric. Let's defund the police. I don't think anybody, well, maybe some people actually agree with it, but not a whole
until
lot.
someone breaks into their home.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So who's the first person you're going to call if you need help? You're going to call the police. So it completely sends the wrong message.
Yep.
And I think that the police department need to know that the current city council support them. They have a difficult job, and we support what you're doing, and let's continue to work together. And tell us what you need, and
Yeah.
which they are. I know they're coming very soon with an ask for a 4-year budget, and there's been going to be some great dialogue there.
Awesome. I wanted to talk about this sort of notion of a sunshine list.
Yeah.
I mean, this is clearly a council that's more inclined towards transparency, accountability. But are we likely to see a sunshine list? And a sunshine list for folks out there, it's effectively like a clear indication if people are receiving in excess of a certain amount of money in compensation for their work that's being drawn from the taxpayers' coffers. That information should be public. Are we likely to see something emerge in the foreseeable future?
Well, it's definitely going to come to a vote for sure. Right now, I got to give a shout out to Councillor Johnston. So this is his motion, and I've seconded it. And because, like, I think that we need some notable, you know, in my term here in 4 years, I at least want three notable accountability, you know, trackable items that we can like, say, hey, this is what we made more clear to the taxpayer and to the public. Um, Personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with a sunshine list because they exist everywhere. The province has a sunshine list right now if you work for the provincial government. And what it does is it shows anything over a certain amount of money. I think the province's right now is 130,000. This particular sunshine motion for the city is going after a little bit higher than that. And what it's going to show is if you make over a certain amount, it's just disclosed publicly, and there's a little bit of resistance to it, but I don't think the reasons that I've heard make a lot of sense because the entire province of Ontario, every municipality has a sunshine list.
Mhm.
What every municipality in BC has a sunshine list. How is Calgary any different?
Yeah.
We're not. So what's the problem with this? I mean, you can go online and see what the mayor, what councillors make. I think that when we're dealing with public money, that there should be nothing to hide. And I think, and this is not targeting this is targeting kind of the middle kind of management, and level and up, where what I think that that kind of accountability only makes things better in an organization.
Yeah.
Now, well, whether it's going to pass or not is another thing. I'm not sure exactly where the will of council is on this one, but I think every councillor ran on we want to make things more accountable. Great. Well, here's one way to do it. If this is not enough, great. Then come up with another way we can do it, and then we'll work together. But I think that this needs to be considered as an option, and I think it was a great idea.
The other sort of final question here for you is on this notion of taxes. It was really interesting because I had Councillor Johnson on not that long ago, and there was like talk of a greater increase in taxes, and the city council managed to claw it back.
Yeah.
Most politicians, maybe this city council is really. I'm looking forward to your response. Most politicians would sort of count that as a win, and his mentality was it wasn't enough. Is this a city council that we can look forward to in the coming years? I understand there's projects to be done. I understand there's work to be done. But are we going to see our taxes? Are we going to see services increase, taxes decrease under the city council?
Well, I think it's definitely possible, but we have to have the mindset that we're willing to prioritize the haves versus the wants. And there's a lot of things that the previous council prioritized last time that we don't need to anymore. And this is where we really need to put our thumbprint on the next 4-year budget. Where hold on a sec, the taxpayer needs to be included in this. Not sure every council has their agenda, but also their needs. We have a huge water utility and infrastructure issue right now. But I think most Calgarians, I mean, the reason why there's 10 new councillors is because I think they really want our money put into our poor services, our infrastructure, the boring stuff. Nobody cares the ideology of a pipe.
Yeah.
Again, it just has to work when you turn on the tap, right? And I think that if that's the approach, we can get money from where it doesn't need to be into what it does, without, destroying our tax base and our small business. Like these are very difficult decisions to make, but you must understand that Calgarians affordability was like the number one thing that I heard at the doors, and I think a lot of people did. Taxation, affordability, great. I mean, we need what is there like a $6 billion deficit right now across for our infrastructure, maybe even more. Well, we don't have that kind of money, but you know what? We can systematically plan to attack this in a very responsible way while protecting the taxpayer. This can be done together, and that's the focus that I'm going to be focusing on.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Counselor Mike Jameson. We really do appreciate it. It's great to have folks willing to come and sort of answer a series of questions, long form, have these conversations. I'm sure the folks you were elected to represent really appreciate this level of access as well. So thanks so much for your time.
Well, hey, I got to tell you, it's great to be back because you were my first podcast. So now I got elected, and I'm back in the chair as a sitting city councilor to be with you again. And it's an honor, and thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Really appreciate it.
All
Thanks.
right, thanks.
And everyone at home, thanks so much for tuning in.